Hey, Rufus! I'm in a particularly nerdy mood today. Let's talk about some Latin phrases that we use in English. That's Greek. That's Hindi from Sanskrit. That's Italian, so I guess you're getting closer. That's probably about as close as you're going to get, isn't it? Yeah, if only your damn parents. Anyway, I've got these two specific phrases in mind, so let's talk about how to pronounce them and how to use them correctly in English. And if you're feeling particularly adventurous today, in the second part of the video, I'll explain the Latin grammatical construction that both of these phrases are examples of. Let's get started. Blackboard. This phrase is definitely the more common of the two, so let's start here. First of all, you may encounter it with two different spellings, although I'll admit I've never seen the first one. It seems to be an older spelling that's fallen out of favor in the last century or two. As far as pronunciation goes, well, you'll be happy to find out that there are so many different pronunciations listed in the Oxford English Dictionary that practically no matter how you say it, you're right. There are 8 different pronunciations listed for UK English and 4 more for US English. The vowels are the main source of divergence between them. You can see that in the US pronunciations, all the vowels in non-stressed syllables get schwad. But in this case, there's another feature of US English that shows up. T-voicing, the tendency of American English speakers to pronounce T between vowels in unstressed syllables as D. That's why all the US versions have a D, where the UK ones have a T. As you can see, though, both flavors of English include hard and soft pronunciations for the C in the first word, and long and short pronunciations for the E in the first word. So, how should everyone pronounce this phrase? Well, I have some thoughts. For what it's worth, in classical Latin, the letter C is always pronounced as hard, and the first and last syllables of the first word have long vowels, while the middle one is short. So the first word would be something like Ceteris in Latin. None of the given pronunciations in the OED has this exactly. For the second word, all 3 vowels are short in classical Latin, so the UK pronunciations are all pretty close. Although the hard C pronunciation is more authentic in the sense that it's closer to the original Latin, this causes a problem of inconsistency with the much more common phrase etc. The cetera in et cetera is the same Latin word as the first word in the phrase we're talking about, so it doesn't really make sense to pronounce the C as hard in one but soft in another. You could argue for always pronouncing the C as hard, but then you'd have to start saying et cetera. People will definitely look at you strangely if you do that, but hey, I can't stop you. I'm going to use my own bastardized hybrid pronunciation of the phrase going forward, so just deal with it. So what does Ceteris Paribus mean, and how do we use it in English? Dictionaries define the phrase as something like other things being equal, which is a pretty straightforward literal interpretation of the Latin. Ceteris does mean other in this sense, and par means equal. We use the phrase Ceteris Paribus in English when we want to compare two things that aren't exactly the same, but only want to focus on one aspect of the difference between them. So even though there may be more differences, one can just say, for the sake of argument, Ceteris Paribus, meaning let's just assume that all of the things are the same for the moment. For example, if you have 2 compound pendulums, not now! If you have 2 compound pendulums, you could say that Ceteris Paribus, the one with the larger amplitude, will have the longer period of oscillation. The Ceteris Paribus is necessary here because the statement may not be true if other aspects of the pendulums, like the arm length, aren't also the same. And now the other phrase in today's video, this one. Pronunciation options are much more limited here. The OED only lists 1 UK and 1 US pronunciation, although it's really 2 for each because of the J in the parentheses. Just as in the Ceteris Paribus example, the main difference between the two is that the US versions have those schwad vowels in the unaccented syllables again. The parenthetical J indicates that some people pronounce the first syllable of each word as mu and others as mu. Again, for what it's worth, this phrase in classical Latin would be something like Mutatis Mutandis. But the long I endings don't get preserved in any current pronunciation, so you can either say this as Mutatis Mutandis or Mutatis Mutandis. Now, what does this phrase mean? Again, dictionaries will give you a definition that's pretty close to the literal Latin meaning, something like with the necessary changes, or the necessary changes having been made. It's a kind of shorthand when you want to apply something you've already written to another similar thing, but don't want to have to write the whole thing again. So you just say this thing, Mutatis Mutandis, applies to this other related thing, and let the reader fill in the gaps. For example, say you're officiating a wedding. Normally you'd read the vows to each person, but to save time after reading the vows to the first person, you could just say to the second person, hey, Mutatis Mutandis, do you? And then everybody can get tanked at the open bar 3 minutes earlier. And now some gratuitous Latin grammar bonus content. Oh yeah, we got a fancy new graphic for these situations. Look, here it comes. Ceteris Paribus and Mutatis Mutandis are both examples of Latin ablative absolutes. They're called absolutes because they are self-contained phrases that don't depend on any other elements in the rest of a sentence for their meaning, and they're ablative because, according to Latin grammar, nouns and adjectives in these phrases need to appear in the ablative case. Bonus fact, ancient Greek doesn't have an ablative case. I know, right? Greek still has these constructions, but they appear in the genitive case instead of the ablative. So, the rules for ablative absolutes in Latin apply to Greek as well, mutatis mutandis. So, in Latin, these phrases have their subjects as nouns or pronouns in the ablative case, and their verbs as participles, also in the ablative case. There are lots of different ways of translating these phrases into English. The most literal way is the slight over-translation of with X having been Y'd, or whatever tense the participle happens to be. They can also be translated more naturally as dependent clauses beginning with when, since, or although, whichever best fits the context. So let's parse Ceteris Paribus with these rules in mind. For this part I'm going to use the classical Latin pronunciation, so don't be weirded out. This may seem a bit strange because both Ceteris and Paribus are adjectives, so this ablative absolute appears to have no noun or participial verb, so what's going on? Well, when an adjective appears with no noun to modify, we say it's being used substantively, that is, as a noun. Generally, you just add the word men, women, or things after the adjective, depending on whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. Yes, Latin has 3 genders for its nouns and adjectives, so does Greek. Annoyingly, the form Ceteris is itself ambiguous. It can be masculine, feminine, or neuter. So here we just have to understand based on context that it's neuter. So Ceteris here means the other things. Paribus, the other word, must also then be neuter and plural and ablative, agreeing with Ceteris. This doesn't answer the question of the missing verb, however. So the rules say that you should take the verb and express it in its equivalent participial form, but Latin has no present active participle for the verb to be, so this ablative absolute has no expressed participle. So Ceteris Paribus means literally with the other things being equal. And now for Mutatis Mutandis. This one's neat because both words are participles formed from the same verb, mutare, meaning to change. In this phrase, it's the mutandis that's the adjective being used substantively. Just like Ceteris, mutandis is neuter plural, so we need to supply the word things after it. Mutandis is a future passive participle, or gerundive in this case, which is usually translated with a sense of obligation, things that must be changed. The other word, mutatis, is the participle functioning as the verb. It's perfect and passive, having been changed. So mutatis mutandis means, literally, with the things that must be changed having been changed. The word order doesn't matter here. Mutandis mutatis would mean the same thing. This may all seem a bit obtuse, but English actually has an equivalent construction called the nominative absolute. It's really the same thing as one finds in the Greek and the Latin, with the obvious difference that English doesn't have different inflectional endings for cases. These sentences, for example, contain English nominative absolutes. Oh yeah? What's today's video about? See you next time.